Hello friends, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Danny and today we're going to be looking at some book recommendations. Specifically those in the format of if you like this fall aesthetic, maybe you should try these books. In the fall season, a lot of people kind of come out of the woodwork and express their love for fall, and I always find it amusing how many different versions of autumn there are for people. And so I thought it would be interesting to look into 3 different types of fall personalities, I guess, and see what books I think fit into those categories. I definitely have my comfort zone when it comes to autumn reads, but I'm going to try my best to find some book recommendations for each of the 3 aesthetics that I found. The first category that we're going to be looking at is the people who love the dark and creepy side of fall. So these are the people who like to be scared, love scary movies, like actual scary movies, not jokingly or satire scary movies. The people who on Halloween they dress up or they make their houses look as creepy as possible for those trick-or-treaters. This is the category that I probably feel the least comfortable with giving recommendations. I have just recently gotten into horror. Over the last couple of years, I've been dabbling in the horror genre, and so I'm definitely a newbie when it comes to that, so give me a little bit of grace. But I think I found 2 books that if you haven't read these already and you like the scarier side of fall, that you might enjoy. The first recommendation is House of Hunger. This was very, very popular last year, and so if you haven't heard of it, it is about a young girl who, or not young, but like, I can't remember how old she is exactly, but she's probably upper teens or lower 20s if I remember correctly. And she is working in, I think it might be Victorian era, but she is definitely in the lower class, and she is working at a very hard job, bone-breaking job, and she is struggling to make ends meet. Her brother does not make it easier on her, and she's having to support the 2 of them with this job that does not pay very well. And in this society that this book is created in, there are vampires, known vampires, so the society is aware of them. And in these vampire households, there are things called blood maids. And people definitely look down upon this position. It's almost seen as, well, it is seen as prostitution. And so she ends up making a decision to become a blood maid because it offers greater opportunities for her. It's been a minute since I've read this, but I'm pretty sure they have some sort of like, I don't know, it's almost like a retirement plan. Like you work for them for so long and then you essentially have the rest of your life to live it up, and they give you the means to do that. And some very dark things ensue in this book. She gets herself in over her head, and I think that's all I'm going to tell you. This book does a really good job of creating kind of an ominous atmosphere, and even though I do not think that this is the darkest horror novel out there by any means, for me it was very unsettling, and the stakes were very high, and the things that happen towards the end of this book are very creepy, and I remember cringing at moments. And so yeah, I think that you would enjoy this book. The second recommendation I have for those of you who like the darker side of fall is Bunny. Once again, this is a very, very popular novel, but I know some people haven't picked it up just because of what is out there on the internet about it. It is very polarizing. Most people love or hate it. I fell in the middle. I think that this book was very confusing to me, but I kind of liked it. So at the end, I remember having that moment of, because a whole bunch of people told me whenever I picked this up, like, oh, you're either going to hate this or you're going to love this. Like, there is no in between. And throughout the book, I was like, I'm enjoying this. I think this is fun, creepy fun, really kind of scary what is happening. This book reminds me of the feeling that I got when I watched the movie Donnie Darko. Not the same plot whatsoever, but it just, I don't know, atmosphere and vibes from the book. But it was enjoyable to read. I wanted to know what happened, and so it definitely was page turning. And I got to the end, and I ended up rating this a 3-star just because, and I think I would like to reread this at some point in time just to see what my thoughts are the second time around, because at the end of the book, I was a little frustrated because this book is not one that you get answers with, but at the same time I was like, I kind of liked it though. It was such a weird, bizarre feeling. If you haven't heard of Bunny, you follow a girl who is at a college and she is in a writing class. And there are a group of women in this college that call themselves the Bunnies. And the Bunnies they are a friend group that are they're very odd, and they have a very cliquish vibe. They call each other bunnies, which is why they are called the Bunnies. And they have these weird parties. And she ends up getting invited into the group and to kind of become part of this clique. And things get very dark very quickly, very confusing very quickly. And yeah, this book is very, very hard to explain because, like I said, you don't get many answers, and there are so many weird things that happen in this book. There were definitely parts of this book that I was like, are we dreaming? Is this really happening? Like, you're definitely questioning things the entire time. The next category is the whimsical fall lovers. So these are those of you out there who love the magic of this time of year. You like adventure, you like maybe a little weird, a little dark, but you always also want light at the end and for there to be like some type of redeeming quality. This is probably my favorite of the 3 categories that we're going to talk about today, but I also feel like I have, in my own personal taste, I mix a lot of these categories, and so I'm sure that you guys do too. But the first read that I have for this category is The Girl Who Drank the Moon. So this was, I think, my first middle grade on my booktube channel. I was a little worried about picking up middle grade just because of the fact that I obviously am not in that age category, and so I strayed away from reading middle grades just because I thought that I didn't want to judge a book unfairly because I'm not its intended audience. But this book was absolutely fantastic. In this book, you follow a village that lives out kind of in the middle of the woods, and there is a long known tradition. Tradition's a horrible word for it, but it is what it is. They essentially sacrifice a baby in their village to the woods. So they don't kill the baby, but they put the baby out in the woods, and supposedly the witch of the woods comes and takes the baby, and that's why the witch doesn't bother the village, because of these sacrifices. And you also follow within this storyline the witch, and the witch comes by this village every once in a while. I think it's yearly if I remember correctly, to essentially retrieve these babies because she has no idea why they're being abandoned. And so she has over time developed this habit of always talking by this village, collecting the baby, and taking the baby to another village nearby to be adopted and taken care of. And so you definitely have like this miscommunication and this fear, this unwarranted fear from these villagers, and this misunderstanding from this witch because she doesn't really understand why these babies are being abandoned. She also doesn't take it upon herself to figure out why. But that's not the point. She ends up collecting one of these babies, and the baby ends up drinking magic. Well, I'll just leave it at that. And she knows that she can't adopt this baby out anymore because of the fact that the baby does have magic, and that can be dangerous in unknown hands. And so she decides to take it upon herself to raise this child in the woods. And the found family in this book is just fantastic. The characters, there's a side character along, or I guess 2 side characters along with the witch that you get to know along the way. And the little girl, I can't remember her name, but it's just such a lovely story, definitely magical. There's some heartache in the book as well, but it's just a lovely story. The next recommendation I have for this category is The Graveyard Book. So this is a little on the darker side of middle grade, so still very light. I read this in, I think it was it last year? Was it the year before? But it ended up being my top book of the year. This book has a quality in it that I really appreciate, and I talked about it in my book hunt videos this year, where it takes something that's very, very dark and something that is thought upon as being sinister and troubling and turns it on its head. So if you haven't heard of The Graveyard Book, you follow a young boy whose parents are murdered at the very, very beginning of the book, and he escapes the house while the murderer is still in his house and travels to a local graveyard, and essentially is protected by the graveyard and raised by the beings in the graveyard. So ghosts, and there are other characters as well that take on the responsibility of raising this young man who's lost his family. And what I was saying before, the graveyard, like graveyards in general, are known as very like somber places and very places where you go to kind of lay your tragedy down, and where people go to rest. And it turns into this, once again, found family. I'm definitely a sucker for that trope. It turns into this wonderful story of this boy being raised in this really unconventional way, with these characters that have had their lives and they are trying to let him have his. I loved this book. It definitely has its darker moments. It doesn't shy away from that, which I appreciated from a middle grade. But it definitely, this is like the quintessential fall book for me. I absolutely love this book. I do have a third recommendation for this, and that is Nettle and Bone. I've talked about this recently on my channel. This was a 4-star. Oh, speaking of which, the last two books, The Girl Who Drank the Moon and The Graveyard Book, were both 5 stars for me. Nettle and Bone was a 4-star book. This is a T. Kingfisher book where you follow a sister who is the 3rd daughter, I believe, in a royal family, and her eldest sister is married off to a very abusive man and prince, and she wants to do something to help fix it, and she seeks out the company and the help of other people. And so you have this kind of ragtag group of individuals who come from different backgrounds who are working together to kind of solve this problem and save her sister. It definitely has a magical element. You start out with her talking to a bone witch, or is it a grave witch or a bone witch? One of the two. And she has to do 3 impossible tasks for this bone witch in order for her to help her. And one of them is to create a bone dog. And so essentially like stitching together these bones to create this magical dog, and he is one of her companions throughout the novel, which I just absolutely love an animal companion, even if they are made of bones. But I absolutely love Bone Dog. And then you have like a demon-possessed chicken in the book, and of course the bone witch, or the grave witch. Gosh, I wish I could remember which one. And it's a very short book, so I don't want to give you too much, but it was a lot of fun. Definitely a journey story where she is traveling through the forest and all these different locations in order to, she collects her band of people, but then also to get to her sister finally. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. The third category I have for you guys is cozy fall vibes. So if you are a person who enjoys like those crisp fall mornings, putting on a sweater and, you know, curling up by the fire, reading a book, maybe having some pumpkin cookies or a piece of pumpkin pie, these books are for you. The first book is a book that I am currently reading, but I'm really enjoying it, and that is The Mysterious Affair at Styles. I imagine that any Agatha Christie book is going to fit into the fall vibes. I can't say that for certain because this is my first Agatha Christie, but I have really enjoyed reading this book in the evenings. This is my Kindle book, and if you haven't listened to me talk about how I read different books, so I always have a physical book, an audiobook, and a Kindle book. And my Kindle book is the book that I read right before bedtime. And this book has really relaxed me. Once again, I haven't read a lot of, or I haven't read any other Agatha Christie's, but her writing is very it's oddly comforting. Even though the book is about, obviously, this woman gets murdered, or not murdered, but like this woman dies in a mysterious way. And so they're trying to figure out whether or not it's a murder. And so it's definitely darker content, but it's written in such a, I don't know, it's just kind of a fun, light, out in the country vibes. I've really enjoyed it so far. So I'm sure that other Agatha Christie's, because they're not all set obviously in the countryside, are going to be have a little bit different vibe, but I feel like her writing style just lends itself to being a really cozy read. The next book recommendation I have for this aesthetic is Lockdown Abbey. So this book I read quite a while ago, right after I had watched Downton Abbey. So if you are a fan of Downton Abbey, I would definitely recommend this book. You have a manor in the 1930s, and there is a mysterious illness going through the, I can't remember if it's set in London or like England in general, but the countryside, there's an illness going on, and so the people at the manor are very much separated from it because it's happening in kind of the localized like village area where the people mingle a lot more than people at the Abbey. And however, there is a mysterious death that happens at the Abbey, and so they have to solve the mystery inside the Abbey. And it definitely, like I said, has Downton Abbey vibes. It was very wholesome, even though we were talking about a murder. So once again, kind of those cozy vibes, along with a mystery to solve. So the last thing that I want to talk about is a couple of books that don't really fit into any of the three categories that I've given you guys. They have like bits and pieces from each of the different aesthetics. And so, but I still think that they are excellent reads. And so I'll kind of pinpoint like what pieces of each of the different categories these books fit into. So the first is A House with Good Bones. This book, I think, fits into all three categories in a way, probably more the whimsical and the dark aesthetic. So we start out with having a woman who is traveling to see her mother and is going because her brother is concerned with her mother's behavior. And she goes in. Her mother is typically a very lively person. Her house was always filled with colors, and she was always like really enjoyed food and like all like it was very, she was a very cheerful person. And she goes to see her mom, and her mom seems very petrified and kind of closing in, not allowing herself to enjoy the world around her. She's painted her entire house white and taken down some of her most beloved paintings in the house to put up things that she typically wouldn't enjoy, and seems very bothered by something going on and thinking that someone is watching her. And so she has to figure out what's going on with her mom and why these changes have happened. This book definitely has some very creepy things that happen in it, and so I do think that it hits that dark aesthetic. But for whatever reason, when T. Kingfisher writes horror, it is so, it's almost fairy tale-esque, which is why, or fairy tale-esque, which is why I say that it fits into like that whimsy or whimsical atmosphere. It could really, even though I've heard some people describe her books as cozy as well. This particular book I didn't find cozy, but I did find the culmination of events whimsical in a way. It was dark whimsy, definitely, but I definitely think that there is some magic and adventure in this book as well. The next book that doesn't really fit into one category was Weyward. This is a recent book for me. I think this book slightly fits into the darker category and then slightly fits into the whimsical category. I don't think that it's super cozy. You follow three different timelines in this book. The main timeline is a woman who's kind of set in our time, and she is fleeing from an abusive relationship and goes to seek refuge in a cottage that her family has owned for a very long time that she has inherited. And within that, you find out that that cottage belonged to one of her very, very, very distant relatives back in the 1600s. And this distant relative was tried for witchcraft. And you follow her timeline as well, figuring out, so you start off, like one of the very first chapters in the book is her awaiting her trial for witchcraft, and you follow her through the trial. And then there is an in-between timeline that is a more recent relative of the girl who is fleeing the abusive relationship. And so the dark side of this isn't really... it's not horror by any means. It's more the dark side of reality and what can happen. The fact that the world isn't a nice place for a lot of people. And so that's kind of the darker aspect. The whimsical, magical aspect is the pieces and what you learn about these women and their history. And I feel like there's another category that I should be putting this in, but I can't put my finger on it. So it's definitely not a cozy read by any means, and it's not scary, but I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the weaving of the time pieces together and all of the relationships of these women, kind of building up this to the culminating event. But yeah, I thought it was a fun read. The last recommendation that I have for you guys is also a dark whimsical. So maybe I should have made a dark whimsical category as well. But that is Catherine House. This book is very polarizing. A lot of people love or hate it. I am on the love side of things. You follow a girl who is essentially applying to Catherine House, which is a very prestigious institution. People who go there typically have very, very successful lives. However, Catherine House has a rule that if you are going to go to Catherine House, you have to essentially submit 3 years of your life to them. You are not allowed to leave the grounds. You are not allowed to contact the outside world. Essentially, they own you for those 3 years. And you notice throughout the book that there's definitely something sinister going on behind the scenes. That's where the kind of dark whimsy comes into play. There are definitely dark things that are happening, and the whimsical side is you don't really understand what is happening, and you know that it's not set in our world. Like, I don't know that I would even say that. You know that something that's going on is not normal, not natural. I'll say that. It's so, the book is so atmospheric. It's great. But the thing that people don't like about this is definitely a book that you do not get answers. This is also a book that is very meandering, which I loved. I thought it added to the atmosphere, the kind of confusing nature of the storyline. But a lot of people think that it's kind of boring because you're just kind of wandering around. Another aspect of this book that I really enjoyed is the apathy of the main character and the progression of that apathy throughout the book. So I'll leave it at that. I really enjoyed it. I hope that if you pick it up, you do as well. So those are my recommendations for certain fall aesthetics to certain books. I hope you found something on this list that you would enjoy. If you have any recommendations for any of these different categories, especially the dark horror or the dark fall vibes, because that is one that I would like to get into more broadly than I have recently, leave those in the comments down below. I would love to add to my spooky TBR for fall season. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you have a lovely evening, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.